This week, we have an exciting conversation with Drew from Bridge, an organization that focuses on democracy and justice initiatives. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Beyond Giving, Drew. I'm super excited to help our listeners learn more about Bridge and the amazing impact you guys are creating. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, Zach. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everything that you're doing at Nonprofit HQ, man. It's really great stuff.
You know, empowering change makers is what it's all about for us. And so coming across or having the opportunity to bring on a change maker that creates other change makers is amazing. So what actually is Bridge? Can you kind of walk us through what your organization is, what your mission is, and how you're creating that change?
Yeah, I joke with folks that Bridge is a startup starting startups, right? You know, because we're only about 4.5 years old,
Wow.
but we've accomplished a lot in that amount of time. And the way that Bridge got started was I was an executive director of civic engagement nonprofit here in Texas, and I was lucky to have really good mentors and folks that I could lean on. But several years into scaling that organization, I had other organizations, other founders and people who wanted to start their own civic engagement nonprofits come to me and was like, how are you fundraising? How are you, managing your finances? How did you scale from $90,000 a year to 3.5 million in 5 years, right? And what I found is there wasn't a lot of spaces for those early stage nonprofits that are doing democracy and justice work. And so when I stepped away from Move Texas and handed it over to the staff that's leading it now, that is when I was like, I want to create this space, and I don't want it to be, where it's just temporary consultant type stuff, mm-hmm. right? It's like we are a home for these organizations when they're at their smallest and at their most vulnerable to when they're, millions of dollars of annual budget and that kind of thing. And so Bridge empowers civic engagement organizations to build stronger teams and grow sustainable revenues and really scale their impact. And we do that for democracy and justice organizations across Texas.
That's awesome. Cool. And so you're taking these, they start with you, the journey, I guess, of these organizations through Bridge. They start pretty young, right? Go through your Incubator program and then graduate onto the Accelerator program.
Yeah, we have a whole pipeline now for organizations, and we interact with organizations that could be just a concept, right? Just an idea, and that's on the earlier stage of our pipeline through orgs that are hey, we've done great work for several years. We have 1 or 2 staff members, but we just need the revenue and the know-how to be able to scale this work. And so, our programmatically, we have Startup School, which is our resource hub. So that's open for anybody in the democracy and justice space in Texas to get resources and tools and things like that to how do I even start an organization? How do I file a C3? Yeah. What is fiscal sponsorship? All of that stuff. Our next program is called Launchpad, and that's really where we are beginning to give promising organizations access to legal support, financial support, and in the future fiscal sponsorship. So saying hey, here is a solid foundation for you to lay your plans in place and get going. And then our next program is Incubator. That's a 15-week program. It comes with a $5,000 grant, and these are typically this space is typically for volunteer-led organizations, but we really meet those organizations where they're at and help them get clarity on who they are as an organization, what they do. And then our last few programs, Accelerator is our flagship. That's what we're most known for. It's a $50,000 direct funding to be selected into that. It's highly competitive. We also run a $50,000 plus supported fundraising campaign with those folks, and they exceed that almost every time.
Nice.
But we really focus on scaling organizations in that space. So that's, fundraising and strategy and, human resources and management and things like that. Once they graduate from either Incubator, Accelerator, they go into our alumni program, which is called Collective, and they continue to get support from us throughout, as we go along. And then the other thing, our last program is called Residency, and we know that like the nonprofit sector is burning out leaders.
Absolutely.
And so we have we're developing a facilitated sabbatical program so that like founders who often don't have the access to sabbaticals, like they can say, okay, I'm going to take a month off. I'm going to take 2 months off, and then our staff helps support their organization.
Oh, interesting.
And so that they don't have to worry about like, is stuff getting, like what if somebody has a question or whatever, or they're not getting bugged while they're, and they can really fully step away. They can fully rest, and then our folks help their organization continue.
That's such an interesting concept, and one that I haven't heard anywhere else in like all the different areas that we touch in the nonprofit space, because that's so true. Nonprofit leaders are constantly burned out, right? They're putting everything into their organization, and they often don't have a moment to step back, to clear their mind, to think about something else and kind of reset. So that's interesting. One of the things you said you had mentioned was in one of your programs, was it the Incubator program? You said you meet them on their terms, you understand what it is they need. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit? Because that's also, I think, a pretty unique characteristic in what would differentiate an organization like Bridge from others that are that quick. Here's a thing, box checked, move forward, right?
Yeah, we're highly tailored to each individual organization, and that's all of our programs, but especially our two sort of growth programs, which is Incubator and Accelerator. And so leaders that are selected for those programs, they get executive coaching, right? And that is like weekly conversations about like, what are your goals? What are your intentions? Like, this program is creating these outputs. Is that what you really want, right? And so we're very deliberate about helping them understand like what their impact is on the ground and how does that show up, for like their mission, vision, and values. So for some groups, they come into Accelerator and they're like, I just need to raise money, right? And we're like, okay, great. Like, let's put wood on the fire and go from there. And then some groups will come in and say like, I need to really solidify, the operations side of the organization, or I need to really learn how to budget and manage my finances, and fundraising isn't that much of a priority. And so we really just tailor that to each organization so that when they leave, they have their own like accomplishments and their own metrics and that kind of stuff. And we don't really define that for them. We believe that organizers on the ground know like what their community's solutions are, and we're just there to amplify it.
That's so cool, because you're right. Like the organization knows what it is that their goals are, where they should get there, and they just need some support to get to that end goal. So that's really cool that you guys tailor it that way. What are some of the most common needs that you find from organizations coming through your program? Is it mostly, bookkeeping and finances? Is it mostly fundraising? Is it like compliance? Like, or is it all of it?
We have a wide range of like things that folks come to us to help with, but our number one is obviously fundraising, right? Often we see organizations who come to us and they're like, we have a fundraising problem, right? And so when we actually dive into it and look at it, it's not necessarily like a fundraising problem. It's more of a programmatic identity. There's some way that they're either talking to funders about the organization, or the way that they've structured things, or maybe they're using a lot of jargon or something like that. And so once we can kind of go in and clean up some of that and help them reshape that, then the fundraising stuff takes off, right? And so and we also have a component of our fundraising training program called Money Mindset, which is like the way that you and I think about money is the way that our parents and grandparents thought about money, right? And so like really trying to help leaders, reshape that, right? Like, I grew up in a very rural, low income part of Georgia, right? And then now most of my job is talking to millionaires, and convincing them to give money to causes that we care about, right? So that's a much different thing, and has taken me time to sort of like navigate that, and so like helping leaders navigate that and be able to show up in those donor conversations confident and make courageous ask.
That's so cool. Like, so resources and support like that, especially for people that dedicate their lives for making positive change in their communities, is amazing. I want to change direction just a little bit and talk about your background, Drew. What did you do before all of this, and how did you land in your current seat at Bridge?
I joke with like students that I go to colleges and talk to, because I'm like, I'm a perfect example of like not having it all figured out, right? I have a very like serpentine career path. When I grew up in rural Georgia. I grew up on a farm, loved nature, loved animals, and really wanted to kind of be a farmer whenever I was going through high school. And
what kind of farmer?
I wanted to grow wine, actually. I wanted to grow grow grapes, and at least at that time, there's no great vineyards in Georgia and that kind of thing. And so I was like, I'm going to go to Europe. And, I was too young to get into viticulture school in the United States, too young to go to culinary school. And so I sat down with my parents one morning and was like, I bought a one-way ticket to Heathrow, and I'm going to go to England and study wine. And my mom thought she'd never see me again, and that kind of thing. But yeah, the next week I was flying to London. Over a week or two, I found a job, at a pub, and that paid the bills. And then during the day, I was an assistant sommelier at a Michelin restaurant and hotel in Hyde Park. And so I learned wine during the day, and I practiced the business of spirits and everything in the evening. I did that for a year or so, and then came back, went to the Culinary Institute of America, and graduated from there in Hyde Park, learned how to cook, learned even more about wine. And so I spent 10 years in the wine business. I worked mostly in retail, and that's what actually brought me to Texas. When I landed in San Antonio, my now husband and I found out that we could be evicted from our apartment if, and our kids if like the landlord didn't want to rent to a gay couple, right?
Oh,
wow. And this was 2011, and it was
not even that long ago. That's crazy that was a thing so recently.
Yeah, and so we found organizers who were organizing for a non-discrimination ordinance and plugged in there and did some of that. And in 2013, when that passed, I was like, this is what I should be doing. And so I pivoted out of the private sector into the public sector. I did a White House internship in the Obama administration in the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, and came back to UT Austin at the Annette Strauss Institute for a year, and really studied like what does civic life look like in Texas, and what does that look like for young people. And then after a year there, I landed at Move Texas and spent 5 years at that phenomenal organization. And, grew that from, one city. When I got there was Move San Antonio, and now they're in 6-7 cities, and, just doing incredible impact. We registered 120,000 voters during the time I was there, and, trained, hundreds of incredible organizers that are doing great work across the state and nation now. And so that's, after I left, like I said, after I left Move, I founded Bridge, and I've been doing that for 4.5 years now. And it's like the most impactful work of my life. I get to work with passionate folks who have, a real love of whatever issue they are fighting for, whether that's democracy or climate justice or, racial justice or any of those things. And I'm able to sort of like make a small contribution to their growth.
That's crazy. So farmer to sommelier to chef to political change maker.
And I also own a bonsai nursery now, so I'm back to farming. So,
nice. It's a full circle story.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That's crazy. So what were some of the challenges that you, as you transitioned into the space where Bridge is, and like you did your White House internship and all of that, what were some of those challenges that you kind of discovered or encountered along that way? Because that's quite a career transition, right? Quite a change in path.
Yeah, I interned with county commissioner here in Bexar County, and I was it was my very first internship. I was going to school for public administration at UTSA, and so but I remember telling him one day, I was like, I loved Commissioner's Court so much. I loved everything we were doing there, and I was like, I lamented to him. I was like, I've wasted 10 years in the retail sector. And he, looked at me and said, all politics are retail. It's you being able to build a relationship with somebody, whether that is a voter or whether that is a customer or whatever, is like so important. And that just like turned a light bulb on for me. It was one of those things of I immediately was like, these skills that I've spent a decade plus honing are transferable, right? So I feel like the things I learned back in the wine industry, inform me every single day at Bridge. In the wine industry, I would take care of folks, right? I would help them pick the best wine for their Thanksgiving meal, or pick the best stuff for their daughter's wedding, right? And match it with their food and that kind of thing. And at Bridge, we have that same sort of service mindset of like, I am here to help that founder, that team be successful, and that's we sort of bring that to that space. Right. And so while I have all of these different nerdy skills, they all are sort of like transferable in some ways, and continue to my work today.
Definitely, yeah. I think in everything you do, regardless of what direction you go with your career, everything you've done previously creates those transferable skills and really sets you up for whatever it is that you want to do next. Now, with Bridge specifically, you founded the organization, right? And so you bring kind of that unique perspective of creating an organization, building it, scaling it, creating, driving the programs and the different things that you do now. So how does that translate into or inform the programs and the support that you provide the organizations that come through Bridge programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can, when I'm teaching somebody how to fundraise, right? I have been in their shoes where it's like, I've gotten the no's from funders, right? Or or we're close to payroll, right? And we need to raise money right now so that we can make payroll in 4 weeks or 4 months or whatever that is. And so I understand the pressures of that really demanding side of the work. When we think of all of the just like incredible organizations in the nonprofit sector, they all started out at the same space, right? They all started out with one or two people or a group of people's concept, and were sort of built out by that group, and then added to and scaled. And so the thing that I really appreciate by doing this work is that we believe that like strong leaders build strong movements, and that by teaching things like systems and clarity, that unlocks impact in organizations, and that progress isn't just a political idea; it's like an actual practice. So there are things you can do to move your organization, your work forward, and it's very sort of tangible and requires focus, requires prioritization, right? Requires decision making and things like that. But it is one of those things that I believe that we have centered ourselves in that work. And when I started Bridge, there was not really that many spaces like this, right? We're the first state-based accelerator program for democracy and justice startups in the United States, and so we work within this giant state that is Texas. You could fit 6 Ohios here, right? Yep. But because of that, there are places in East Texas that have no organizations that are registering voters, right?
Right.
Now they do, because we helped an organization called Este Poder start up there, right? And there's places in West Texas that don't have anybody fighting for climate justice, right? And there are those groups there now, right? And so we're able to really like look at the 30,000-foot view and see where there are gaps at, and then sort of help them start and then get integrated into the entire ecosystem. So they're working in tandem beside the larger organizations and in coalition work and things like that.
Do you ever just like step back and see, even if it's like dots on a map, right? All of these organizations and initiatives that you guys helped start that came through your program, and you're just like, damn, we did that.
Yeah, it's, in 4 years, we've helped 36 organizations start or scale, right? And so, last year alone, 9 million of new money moved into the state via our network. And so that is, whenever we have a summit once a year where we get all the alumni together, which we call Collective. And so at the Collective Summit, I really stand in the back and sort of almost tear up, because it's like, look at this room that wasn't here 4 years ago, right? And that, there are now organizers in Beaumont, doing climate justice work there, or there are organizers in the Rio Grande Valley doing high school voter registration, or there are folks in, the north part of Dallas that are, doing get out the vote work. And so it's really super rewarding. And I have an incredible team. We're up to 7 team members now,
wow.
Which is great.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so, but I get to work with like incredibly smart, talented, and passionate people that do the support of this network on a day-to-day basis.
So 36 organizations supported, $9 million in new money into Texas. If we rewind a bit to the first days of Bridge, what did that look like? And how did you bring in your first cohorts and your first organizations to your programs, and really even establish what programs you needed to provide? And like, okay, I'm asking a ton of questions right now, but let's just go back to the beginning of Bridge. What was that like?
Yeah, all of my executive director friends, told me, they're like, you should take some time off after you leave Move, take 6 months off and just kind of like, relax at home. And I'm a bad vacationer, so like I
vacation with your MacBook.
Yeah, so I got like 15, 20 days into that, and I'm like, I got to find something to do, right? I had already been sort of had a white paper on like what I thought Bridge could be and that kind of stuff. And, Robert Rivard and a few others found out about like what I was talking about and doing. And then it sort of hit the news. So I was like, well, I got to go, right? And so that was, May, June of 2021. I knew that an accelerator was going to be our sort of, core piece of like, how do we help organizations figure out like what they need and how to get them to grow. And that was so that's where we started at was our accelerator program. And our very first cohort had 2 San Antonio orgs and a Dallas org. But we met here in San Antonio every 6 weeks. We worked side by side with them. At that point, it was just me, and I had a couple like contract coaches, and but we really helped those 3 organizations just flourish, and we learned a lot of things of like what they needed and what they didn't need, and what they needed but they didn't know they needed, right. So it taught us a lot. Lots of failures in that first year or so. I think that it was we had to tell a donor narrative that donors weren't used to, right? Which is like, hey, we are this organization that's helping these organizations grow, and so donors are like, well, why do we need to give to you if we can just give directly to them, right? And so it's like, well, and so explaining like how we nurture those organizations, also encouraging them to give directly to those organizations, and why the ecosystem mattered. And so, we did the very next year we did Accelerator 2 and Accelerator 3, and this year we are currently in Accelerator 7, and we'll do, we did 3 incubator classes this year. We'll do another new incubator was just announced for January for Greater Houston, and then next year will be a lot of like support work on the ground for alumni organizations. So we've learned so much. Every single program iterates on top of the next one based on feedback and listening to folks on the ground and what they need, and then also helping them find out what they don't know but they need.
Yep. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges too of the various different people that start nonprofits, right? They are often very motivated by the impact they're creating, whatever that mission is, and that's really important. But they also don't know what they should know or how they should do things on the business side of that, right? Compliance, how you manage those finances, how you create that donor narrative, how you even clearly describe what it is that you're trying to do, right? So I think that's pretty cool. But we've talked a lot about how Bridge supports kind of those organizations as they're coming up through your program. But you've mentioned a few times your alumni support as well. And I know earlier you mentioned that it's not this is a problem we're solving here. When they're brought into your portfolio or your network, they have long-term support. So what does that kind of look like for organizations that went through all the Bridge programs that are out there, they're scaling? What kind of support are they able to still receive from Bridge and then maybe even give back to that Bridge network?
Yeah, we call our collective space a community of practice because we don't see ourselves as a table. We don't see ourselves as like some sort of coalition or that kind of thing. We really look at ourselves as like, hey, we are a community that are practicing different things all together, and we're learning together. We're strengthening each other together, and they are teaching us just as much as what we're teaching them. So we have lots of opportunities, from our collective summit, which is once a year. Everybody gets together from all across the state and has 2 or 3 days worth of workshops.
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
And trainings and fellowship time together, rest. But then also we have year-round leadership coaching. We also do things like what we call intensives. So we will pick a theme, like this year was fundraising, right? And so alumni groups will apply to that program, and then we go really deep with those groups and into their fundraising strategy. And so this year, during that program, we had some alumni that, dramatically diversified their donor base, by adding additional major donors or individual donors or institutional donors. And we had one group that came up with an entirely new alternative revenue model where they set up a co-working space and started charging other organizations, reasonable fees to come work together, right? And so that creates additional revenue for them that they don't have to go fundraise for and stuff like that. And so
that's such a cool, and sorry to interrupt there, but I want to highlight that because what you pointed out is something that a lot of nonprofits kind of miss, right? They think they can't charge for anything. They can't bring in these additional streams of revenue. Why is it so important that they do that?
Because it's they are the experts on the ground, right? So they are the ones that are out there, whether it's on a college campus or in a high school or in a community center, that are talking to folks every single day, right? So they should be sharing that information with coalition members or that kind of stuff, but they should also charge for that, right? They are spending money, time, resources to go get that information. It should also be, shared, and resources should be shared, right? So there's lots of different ways to sort of operationalize that, whether that is, shared space together, event space, consulting resources, back office support, all of those things. There's lots of different ways to do that. And so we helped that organization sort of build that model, which they have now grown, and they've opened an adjacent art gallery.
Wow.
And, so they have this whole space within McAllen, Texas, where they can invite people and have them interact with them in a much more deep, meaningful way, get ticket sales for it.
That's so cool.
Uplift local artists and that kind of stuff. And then we also, within that space, help organize donors too, right? Because donors are like, I want to support an organization in South Texas or Greater Houston, and that does this work, and we're able to like point them to the organizations in our network that do that, and help prepare the leader to have that conversation with the donor, help the donor get as much information as they need to, and then hopefully there's a match there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so you guys have already created so much legacy, so much impact through Bridge. What's next? What's the next maybe 5 years or 10 years at Bridge look like?
Yeah, I think that we're really thinking very intentional and deliberate about where the state is right now, and what are the issues that are most important regionally, and to the state in the future. Obviously, we do a lot of democracy work. So, we saw redistricting and a mid-year cycle, right? And so 2030 is right around the corner. There's a new census. There's a redistricting possibility there. And so, we're preparing political organizations and civic organizations to get ready for that. We're also, I feel like the two sort of themes of my year as I've traveled around the state this year have been organizational discipline and donor diversification. It's been an incredibly difficult fundraising year for most nonprofits, but especially civic and political nonprofits. And so, teaching them to focus on a core set of issues or a core set of like activities, programs, and then also, broaden your donor base as much as we teach fundraising as an organizing concept. So it's like, I'm an organizer at heart, right? So when I knock on somebody's door and invite them to come out to vote, or when I talk to somebody on a college campus and ask them to register to vote, I'm inviting them into that space. And really fundraising is the exact same thing. When you're talking to a funder, you are giving them the information and then just asking them, like, do you want to join us, right? And so we teach fundraising as an organizing concept as well. And
so in that, what would you say if you had to narrow it down? And you do have to narrow it down. There's like so many important things about fundraising, and when an organization thinks about fundraising or approaching a donor, what would you say is the most important?
The practice of fundraising is the most important, right? I think a lot of folks think that, a lot of leaders think if I have great programs, or if I can have like the best work on the ground and that kind of stuff, but why am I not raising money, right? And it's like, well, often the first thing I do is like open your calendar and show me where you fundraise, like show me like your work blocks, right? And there's often no work blocks, or there's maybe 1 hour where they're sending emails, right? And it's like, fundraising is a full-time plus job, and so teaching founders that like, hey, when you started the organization, you were probably really programmatic dominant, right? You were out in the field, you were talking to people, that kind of stuff. But as the organization scales, and especially as the organization scales, your, sort of strategic work and fundraising work becomes like front and center. And so getting them to say like, okay, I'm going to dedicate 10 or 15 or 20 hours this week to fundraising is the hardest part, but also the most rewarding, because when you see them actually like do that work and get over the fear of making an ask, right, or having a donor meeting or that kind of stuff, then when they're just there talking about the work and being passionate, like donors just light up, and and money comes and that kind of stuff. And so being very intentional about the practice of fundraising, I think, is the key part of that.
Definitely. And do you find that leaders kind of more often than not struggle making that transition when they get to that part, to focus more on, like, say, the fundraising and less on the programmatic side? Or is it usually an easy transition, or what do you guys find through your experience?
It's usually not an easy transition, right? Because they got into the work because they love talking to voters, right? Or they love registering students in high schools or whatever, right? And so they didn't come to this work to write grants,
right?
So it's a little bit of like a mindset shift, right? But donors want to talk to the executive director, the co-executive directors, the founder, right? So they want to have that conversation. So often we see some founders who are like, I'll just outsource that, right? But there's usually mixed results on that, because the donor is like, well, I just want to talk to the person who started the organization, right? Or I just want who's leading the organization or has the vision, right? And so convincing them to dedicate that time, and that work is just as important as being out in the field and talking to folks and that kind of thing is sometimes a struggle, but like it's part of the growth process. It's part of them evolving in their own role as the organization evolves around them.
Definitely. Awesome. And so thinking about Bridge and the community, how can people support? What does Bridge need from the community? How can people get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, you can find us. We have two websites because we have two entities. We have a 501c3 entity called Bridge Infrastructure Fund, and you can go to bridgeinfrastructure.org to find out all of our how we support 501c3 democracy and justice organizations all across the state. We also have 501c4, and that is called Bridge Movements Fund. And so if you go to bridgemovements.org, you can find all of our C4 organizations that we support there. And so please give directly to those organizations. When you click on their name, it'll take you directly to the website, right? And we would also love if you'd donate to us too. And you can find those links directly on our website. The thing that we often are asked for the most is volunteers from the philanthropic sector, people who are program officers at foundations, or maybe nonprofit leaders themselves, to help, volunteer, an hour a quarter, a couple hours a quarter, to just visit with founders and hear their pitch, right? Give them some feedback on the way they're talking about the organization, or the way they're thinking about something, or that kind of stuff. And having, the opportunity for them to talk to a wide variety of mentors and volunteers is really great. So you can reach out to us directly on the website if you're interested in volunteering in that capacity and supporting organizations, or you can follow us on social media. We're at Bridge Movements on all the platforms, and just keep up with our work. We're a fast-growing network in the space, and we just have some really incredible leaders that are going to be, the future, governors, lieutenant governors, city council members all across Texas that are building movements right now.
That's amazing. We'll have all that information in the show description and the show notes as well, so our listeners can connect with Bridge. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Drew. I really enjoyed the conversation, learning about the impact that you guys are creating, and I'm super excited to follow along and see where you guys go from here.
Well, from one founder to another, thank you for what you do as well, Zach. I know this work is really difficult, and just really grateful for you creating the space for nonprofits to learn about each other and from each other, and everything you're doing to connect nonprofits and their folks together. So appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.